Stoughton. I am with Mike Konrad, podcaster, industry guru, and founder of Aqueous Technologies. Mike, thanks for joining me. Thanks for taking part in the recent What's the Scoop, talking about your 2022 trends. Let's just dig straight in there. You talked about chip shortages. So many people did, or shortages, what the press refers to as chip shortages, but they go way beyond chips. Talk me a little bit about your own experience with the supply chain challenges we're seeing.
Yeah, you're right. The press calls it a chip shortage, but it's everything from computer chips to probably chips that you eat. It's everything. We've not, in our business, we're assemblers of equipment, so we don't buy chips, although we buy things with chips on it. So that gets impacted. But even things like solenoids and motors are of short supply. And fortunately, we've been very blessed. We haven't had to restrict shipments. We haven't had any delayed shipments, but we've taken a lot of extra energy and cash flow and thrown it into the transition from just in time to just in case, which means we, probably like most other manufacturers, are all part of the problem. We're exacerbating the problem by stocking up on inventory. We've all become hoarders, and my purchasing team, they will, if we normally buy 3 parts at a time, if we have the opportunity to buy 30 parts at a time or 130 parts at a time, we'll do it because there's, it's like going to Costco. I think you have Costco's in Australia, right?
Yeah.
If you see it and you like it, buy it because it won't be there tomorrow, right? They do a lot of one-time purchases, and it just seems like everything lately is a one-time purchase. It's an opportunity. So we, fortunately, again, very blessed that we had, the cash means to do it. But our shelves are bursting with parts that we use. And, not only do we have to ship machines to keep our commitments, we have to support machines to keep our commitments. So we have to have, at any given time, extra parts over and above our manufacturing needs. So it's been a challenge. It's been a logistical challenge in procuring the parts. In a couple of cases, maybe a few cases, we've had to do some minor design changes to bring in part B instead of part A. It meets the specs, but it doesn't quite fit. So, and that brings challenges because we have to document all that so that 10 years from now, when a machine comes up for service, we don't look at it and go, what's this? This is not the way it's supposed to be. So it's been challenging. It's just a lot of extra energy spent. And
it is a lot of extra work for everybody, isn't it? And, it's interesting. I want to dig in on a few of those things. First of all, it's been the biggest supply chain disruption most of us have seen in our working lives, in terms of being holistic and not being, a specific place. It feels like there's a shortage of materials and various different parts, but there's also a big logistics problem. We hear about boats backed up at LA port, like 50 boats out in the bay waiting to come in, and them taking almost as long to get unloaded and on trucks as they take to get from China to California. So there's a big challenge there. Do you see those two elements, the amount of supply and the logistics, being fixed sometime in 2022?
Yeah, I think the logistics will be fixed maybe before the supply. Right now, I live in Southern California, so my wife and I like to take our electric bikes and ride them along the shore. And if we go to San Pedro or near the port of LA, we can see, just as far as the eye can see, almost to the horizon, we can see ships just at anchor. And our local government has addressed that, not in a manner that will fix the problem, but there was a knock-on problem, and that was all these ships that are still running their engines, when they're anchored, so they could stay under power and run the generators and everything they need to run, were causing even more air pollution than Southern California is known for in the port cities. So now what they're doing is they're telling them to anchor, 100 miles off the coast. and we'll let you know when it's your turn to come close to the coast. So you don't see as many ships out there right now because they're either traveling at half steam power or, you know, whatever, but they're not getting close to shore now, which makes the problem look better. But if you got, you know, a drone that could fly 100 miles out over the ocean, you'd see the problem. It's just further out.
You'd see them. Yeah. No, it's fascinating. One of the most interesting conversations I had in, I think, either November or December was with Chief Supply Chain Officer of Flex, Lynn Terrell, and with Don Ackery of TTI. And Don said barely a day passes where someone doesn't call him up and ask him if he can get a helicopter out to their boat to get their container off. And it's like, really, you're genuinely asking me that question? So
nice try.
I
think this is a lesson. I think for decades into the future, we're going to be looking back at this time and armchair quarterbacking all the decisions that were made. And I think the decisions were all made in good faith. We didn't know what we didn't know. We were dealing with a quickly unfolding set of facts. And it apparently, the decision to shut down industry throughout the world, while well-intentioned, had consequences nobody could foresee, because we've never shut down an entire world's industry before. We've had regional shutdowns, you know, when the earthquake and subsequent tsunami hit Japan, that created a small ripple effect that affected many manufacturers, but we haven't turned the switch off worldwide before. And it turns out it's not so easy to turn back on. And I liken it to 10 people in a circle. Each one manufactures something. They all look at each other. They're standing in a circle and they all say, okay, Phil, Mike, Bob, Jane, we're going to start manufacturing again. Great. Okay, Phil, I need this from you. So I could start. And you need something from someone else, and they need something from someone else. And you just can't go. It's kind of like starting up a nuclear reactor. You don't throw all the rods in and turn on the steam generators. They have to go in sequentially at a certain speed. It's a very delicate process. And I think that is much simpler than turning on an economy. And it turns out, I think if we ever run into this pandemic situation again, which we will, because history repeats, the idea of turning off the economy needs to be thought a little bit more carefully. Now that we know it just doesn't turn back on, even though everyone wants it to and is ready to, it just doesn't. It turns out it's very complex. And
and there's a process to go to. There's a process to go through, and that's the process we're going through now. And as you say, that has all kinds of knock-on effects for companies. And you know, you're in that nice position of having an established business that's been around a few years and has hopefully accumulated a little bit of cash in the bank so you can deal with this. But for some businesses, it's really challenging, and particularly for EMS companies, particularly the smaller and medium-sized EMS companies, they're just sucking in cash at the moment, and that's a challenge. And I think that's feeding what we're seeing in terms of industry consolidation at the moment. There are some opportunist M&As. There are some people that are just chasing scale. There are people that are looking at different supply chains, region for region. And I wonder if some of that is learnings that we will have from this. You know, will we move to a world of maybe shorter supply chains where they're a little bit more independent and a little bit more just in case than just in time, and we're not constantly chasing low-cost labor around the world? Do you feel we can learn something positive, or do you feel it's like many of these things, we talk about that and then a year down the line we're back to bad habits?
Well, I hope for the former. I fear for the latter. I think in so many different examples, from terrorist attacks and security to pandemics, I think we go back to the point of least resistance. And, you know, all of this stems from, in one way or another, I think it all germinates from our chasing the dollar for profit. And I think we really need to think about where things are built. You know, I'm a huge believer, we're a manufacturing company, and our official policy is to buy parts in the city that we build them. And if we can't buy them in the city, we'll buy them in our state. If we can't buy them in our state, we'll buy them in our country. And if we can't buy them in our country, we'll buy them from someone in our country that goes to another country to get it, right?
Yeah.
That's our official policy. And because I'm a big believer in buy where you live, build where you buy. And, and that means you have to come up with other ways to sharpen the pencil. But I think it starts with the consumer. I don't blame businesses, because businesses just respond. You know, it's life imitate art, art imitates life. I think it's businesses respond to their customers' needs. And if customers are demanding 70-inch QLED television sets for $185, you're going to go to the ends of the earth to get it made. And which is fine for some, you know, consumer stuff. But I think that philosophy has fallen on pretty much every product now. And we really have to think, what is price? You know, you have to throw value, you have to throw security, you have to throw reliability, you have to throw security, all these things into the factor, not just the component costs. Right?
And I think it goes beyond that, Mike. I think it goes to not even things, but things like sustainability have to come in there. And, you know, that's impacted massively by the length of the supply chain. I see a generation that's much more concerned about environment. They're much more concerned about fairness. The whole ESG thing is becoming increasingly important, and that has to be considered as well. And perhaps we've just got into some very bad habits of going to Costco and buying, you know, a microwave oven for $49 and not wondering how in the world that can possibly be manufactured, boxed up, and delivered to you at that price. And I think, you know, there needs to be a change in that. Whether there will be or not, I don't know. And like you, I fear the latter.
Yeah, you know, you hear all these terms right now of reshoring and nearshoring and things like that, and some commitments made to build semiconductor foundries, like in the U.S., for example, I think in Texas. Of course, they're not being built by U.S. companies; they're being built by other companies. Right, but I think that mindset will wane as things get a little easier, and then we'll just find ourselves, you know, with the old adage, we learn from history as we don't learn from history. And it'll repeat itself. That's my fear. We can only do what we can do. We're one company, and we're not unique. We're not, you know, there are other companies that think like we do. And, you know, they're not the low price leader. That's someone else's job. And we'll always be a low price leader.
Yeah, I kind of hope there's a younger generation coming through that are smarter than us and are much more stakeholder driven rather than shareholder driven, and hoping that will improve things. I wanted to turn to one of the other things you mentioned in your piece, and that was your belief that in 2022 we'll return to mostly live events. And obviously, you know, even just in the couple of weeks since you sent me the submission, things have changed. You got COVID, for example, and hundreds of thousands of other people did, and we're seeing, you know, a growth in this current Omicron strain, which is impacting travel. I was certainly planning to go to APEX. I feel that's less likely now than it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. How are you feeling about trade shows?
Well, I have a very unique view of trade shows that kind of formed itself before the pandemic. I'm a supporter of trade shows. I'm a supporter of face-to-face meetings. I'm not a supporter of trade shows at any cost. And I think trade shows are one tool in the tool chest from a marketing standpoint. My company stopped exhibiting at trade shows 7-8 years ago. You know, well before all this nonsense that we're in now. But we did because I was under the impression that we were just producing a lot of noise. And every year we had to produce more noise, and we certainly had to produce more noise than our competitors' noise level. And at some point, we switched over to an education model rather than a traditional advertising and trade show model. And I still go to a lot of shows. We don't exhibit at them, but we speak at them. We support the technical conferences heavily. We do a lot of speaking and write a lot of papers. but I'm a believer that educated customers make educated choices. And it's hard to educate when you have 30 seconds on a show floor where you're scanning the person's badge before they run off distracted at something else. And you know, the idea of selling, we have a unique view of what sales is. Sales is not banging the drum and creating a bunch of noise and, you know, look at the shiny object in the corner. That's us.
Yeah.
It used to be, we were kings of that. You know, we had waterfalls, 15
You
feet
did
high,
have
30 feet
waterfalls.
wide. You know, we had every year we had to top ourselves. We were competing with ourselves. And at one point, several years ago, I think the last year we did a big show, we had that giant waterfall that would drop images and words as it fell. And someone came up and asked permission to take a picture. Of course you can take a picture. And then they asked if we could move our equipment out of the way so they can get a better view of the display. And it just hit me.
Yeah, that was a eureka moment. Yeah,
that was a definitely light bulb eureka moment.
Yeah,
like a WTF, all that, those acronyms. Like, what are we doing? So, you know, we decided to kind of cold turkey it. You know, like an alcoholic would just, you know, give up drinking and join AA. We did our version of AA, alternate advertising, maybe. Stick with the AA acronym, and we decided to just kind of back off, let everything cool, watch our sales, see what would result from it, and kind of to my suspicion and surprise, nothing. You know, the sky didn't fall. Because we replaced it with something else. You know, we're constantly staring into a camera or standing in front of a lectern. You know, we do that regularly, as you know, and we replaced the noise with education and educational podcasts and educational webinars and educational efforts and papers and symposiums and things like that. So we're still out there. It's still marketing. It's just marketing that benefits more than us. It benefits the person who's being marketed to. And I don't know if walking past a trade show booth is, you know, other than getting maybe a free cup of coffee, or if you're in Germany, you know, a stein of beer, I don't know how much benefit the attendee gets. And then a lot of people said, well, you can't not do shows because if you don't do shows, your sales will go away. I said, well, you know, Apex is 3 days a year. There's 362 other days a year. What happens in July if someone wants our product? They find it. You know, we're not hard to find. No one's hard to find these days.
No, absolutely not.
So I like the educational model. I like.
Well, I think it's great.
Most of the time we speak, we're not even speaking about what we do.
You know, it's speaking about what needs to be done, what's going on in the industry,
reliability
and
right.
I mean, like today, we haven't mentioned your product, and you know, you and I have spoken on camera probably 3 or 4 times in the last year. We pretty much never talk about your product, but we talk about the industry, we talk about what's going on, we talk about what's important. So I think that's key. You've done a great job. You know, I would say to anybody, if they're looking to replace trade shows, and some of them have had to do that and had to stand up replacements in the year, I would say, look at what Mike Konrad's done. And some of them have done that very successfully.
Yeah, but I want to be real careful. I'm not suggesting people don't exhibit at trade shows. I think if you're a new company with a new product, particularly, that's just a rite of passage. You need to do your booth duty, and you need to do that. I think that, you know, our company just turned 30 years old a few days ago, and you know, people know who we are. We don't need to beat the drum, and technology's changed. The internet was a game changer. It was a leveler. Everybody from the smallest startup to the most experienced legacy company has the same footing now. They have the same level of visibility or potential visibility. And I'm still a huge proponent of conferences. You know, I've done a lot of technical conferences virtually over the last 2 years, and they're a decent second to a live conference, but you miss some of the nuances. But I think conferences will continue in a virtual format, at least as an option, way more than they did before.
I think in the hybrid format. And I think that idea of hybrid marketing, you know, people will go to a number of trade shows, but they won't rely on trade shows as their only source of leads. You know, when we looked at last year, The big challenge in 2020 was the loss of Electronica at the end of the year for the EMS companies. I talked to EMS companies that had 90% of their budget spent in 4 days biannually. And that, that meant losing the trade show was a big challenge to them, but they quickly found out that there were other ways to get thought leadership content out, other ways to interact with their existing customers, and other ways to interact with the media to generate leads. So I think as we look forward, people will have learned from that, and we'll look to hopefully a hybrid model that adds the most value. And I think the trade associations and the event organizers that have respected that have done the best from that. So, companies that stood up really good content during the height of the pandemic, where there was no chance of a live meeting, did very, very well. I look at what South by Southwest have done. I look at what CES did, and having that hybrid model where there's content on stage, there's content on air, and there's content on demand afterwards, I think is really valuable. And some people embrace that really well at Productronica as well. So I kind of see that mixture as being the future.
Yeah, as do I. I think that virtual genie's out of the bottle. More people are familiar, or at least more comfortable with the concept. Yeah. Not everyone does it well, but the opportunity to do it well is there. And I think it'll be with us forever now. I think a lot of companies increase their bottom line. What they may have lost in production, they certainly gained in travel savings and marketing budgets and things like that. That's why I love your company. Not to be a mutual admiration society thing, but you're one of the few. There are some others, but you and a few others really put out technical information and news of what's really going on, not just regurgitated press releases. Our machines are now blue, they used to be green. Run the release. I think these days everything is changing, particularly now everything's changing at light speed, and you can't wait for the next issue, next month's issue to write about it, because by the time you write about it, it's 3 generations
it's changed
old.
Again.
Right. So I think your video content and your writing is spot on, and I think it serves our industry in different ways, and it provides marketing opportunities for manufacturers to use companies like yourself to get the word out. Just less, you and a few others do it way less salesy than other companies do. And because people aren't out to be sold to, they're out to be educated. And
and informed. And I think that's the key. Yeah, one of my favorites that I was listening to throughout throughout December was Eric Miskel's trip to Europe, his EMS Now Untold. Nice 2 characters chatting, in the hotels in the evening as they toured around factories in Europe. And I just found it so insightful, so educational, and so easy to consume, which I think is the key. And when I look at what I do, it's the access to executives like yourself that really create the value in that content. These What's the Scoop pieces typically get 25 to 30 responses from CEOs of large EMS companies down to, small startups or companies that have been in the industry, and people like yourself that have been watching the industry change and evolve over the years. So I'm, able to bring that insight to a broad audience. And I really appreciate that. As you said in wrapping up your piece, may you live in interesting times. We indeed do. It's indeed been an interesting conversation. Mike, thanks so much for your time. I'm sorry I won't see you probably at APEX, but we'll catch up as soon as we can. Thank you.
I wouldn't recognize you with your mask on anyway. We won't recognize each other. This is going to be interesting. So
it's going to be a strange one. I'll talk to you after.